Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. I am Michelle Flores. My channel is Shellyflowers Reads and Writes. We talk about reading, writing, and this month especially, I'm focusing on poetry because it's my favorite genre in the entire world.
Yes, and you're hosting all kinds of poetry things this whole month. You've got the Poet Readathon. You have your
Yes.
poetry book that just came out.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. Everyone should go and
Yeah.
get it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. And next week we'll be doing a panel with you and Camille Myrick and Tish from Little Wolf and Emily Wilson. We're going to talk about poetry. It's going to be awesome. And I have a few tags and videos in the works. So stay on the lookout for that.
Excited. Yeah, so everyone should go over there also.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. So I'm Kaye Spivey. This is my channel. I just assume everyone knows. So we read Deaf Republic by Ilya Kaminsky.
Yeah.
It was. I think I used the word heavy in my video like 50 times. This
Yeah.
is just like every section of it just kept hitting harder and harder,
Hmm.
but like in a well written way, but in a like emotionally hard way to read.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the best way to put it. Like, it's not an easy book to read. Even though it doesn't take very long to read, it's still emotionally very taxing as a
Yeah,
book.
it's not a fun spring read at all, but it's like I feel like it needs to be read. You need to be able to see that connection the way that Ilya Kaminsky was able to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have my coffee here too.
Yay!
Ah.
Oh, good. Yeah. So I also it was set up really different the way it had set up almost as a play,
Yeah.
and so it kind of nearly crossed that line of being kind of like a novel in first, but then of course much shorter than a typical
Right.
novel. The play format I've not seen in a poetry book before this one.
Same. It was the first time, and it works really well. I remember in college, one of my professors talked about how poetry and screenwriting are way more similar than other genres of writing. And
Oh,
I
that's cool.
never really understood that until I read this book. And I can see
Ah.
it now in a way that I didn't really see it before.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And yeah, I don't know if you had anything else to say on that.
Yeah.
I think also just having the dramatis personae part kind of
Yes.
set you up for what was going to happen, but in a way that I had felt like, oh, okay, we're going to be like watching the action, but it's not. You're very much
In it.
in there with them at all times, and so it almost made it almost set my expectation to be very far away, and instead it put you very close, and it maybe it is a lot harder to read because of that.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree. And then I also wonder, like, given that the book is called Deaf Republic, and like I went into it reading this as like we're reading literally about a group of people who are all deaf living in a
Mm.
community, and then like this outside force that's coming in and trying to like take over the community. So I wonder if that was part of the experience that he was trying to get across as well, because Ilya
That's
Kaminsky is also deaf.
mm-hmm. That's a good point. I I had almost seen the deafness in a totally different way. I didn't come
Okay.
in. I knew that he was deaf, but I was seeing it more as that the deafness was almost people enforcing it on themselves, that they're not actually deaf. They're choosing to be deaf to these people as a form of protest. And
Mm,
so, yeah, hearing you describe it that way is a really interesting difference because I was seeing it almost as because the little boy who was shot at the beginning, Petya,
yeah.
because he was deaf, everyone was choosing to be deaf to everything that the soldiers were saying as a form of resistance against them. Like
That's
in
really
honor of him is sort of how I had read it.
yeah. That's interesting. I do wonder about that, like deafness as a choice
Mm-hmm.
versus just like a lived reality and a lived experience.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a really interesting concept. And then I feel like, I mean, that would make sense as well, because especially towards the end of the book, when he talks about like things happening in the US specifically, and like how we
Mhm.
choose to be deaf to those things as well.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's a really interesting take on the book.
Well, and there's almost a flip in the second act where it switches over to what's her name, when Alfonso has died, and then it's the what is her name, the head of the prostitutes,
Oh yeah, yeah,
Galia. When it
yeah.
switches over to that, because at first everyone is sort of like with Alfonso and the deafness is against the soldiers, but towards the end of that section, the deafness is against her. The
Mhm.
people are choosing not to see her and to turn against her.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it almost is more like a willful thing in the
Yeah.
context of the book. Although I'd really like to hear someone who is deaf how they would have taken that
Yeah.
specifically.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be really helpful. When I've heard him talk about it, like he I don't think he's ever specifically stated otherwise, because I think every time I've heard him talk about this book in particular, he brings in a lot of like historical context.
Mm.
I wonder too, because like now I'm looking at the back of this, and oh, let me see if I can
That's
flip it.
pretty much everything I know about him is just this back blurb.
Yeah,
I didn't look
but
up too
like
much about him.
yeah, and like looking at this question where it's like, what happens when the citizens of a country no longer hear one another? That seems
Mm.
like a very intentional question, because it's like it's not saying whether they're choosing not to hear each other or not.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that's part of the commentary as well, of like, when you're in a society that is being so marginalized, how do you survive that?
Yeah, good point.
You know, how do you go about your day-to-day life and still make space for the trauma and the pain that you're going through? Can you do both things at the same time? And I
Mm.
wonder if maybe his argument is like, no, until you can't ignore it anymore.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah, because he has the sign language parts within
Yeah,
too. So there is then a different form of communication, but it's sort of it's sparse, and it seems like maybe it's just me. Maybe I felt like it got more sparse towards the end, but then I know there's where it shows a whole bunch of them all together
right.
is closer to the end of the book. I think I noticed it more at the beginning, which could have just been me noticing it there.
Hmm. No, I think, yeah,
Just
I'm
flipping
looking at
through
it
it.
too. I'm flipping through it too now. I think you're right, because I think it's like the halfway point, and then we don't really see as much sign language unless it's like a chapter break or an act break, like it's described,
Yeah.
which is interesting too. This idea of like communication
Mm-hmm.
breaking down, like in all of its forms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was really good. I
Yes,
really
I agree.
liked it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Writing wise, it was beautiful all the way through. Like you're completely engaged with all the characters. For it
Yes.
being poems, like you're in with Sonia and Alfonso, and then you're in with the Mama Galia, I believe her name is. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. It was beautifully written. I have like a million places where I like underlined lines because it was just so beautiful, or poems that just like hit me.
I agree
Yeah.
completely. One poem that I really loved, The Map of Bone and Opened Valves. That was the one that I like
Oh
starred.
yeah.
And I think I read this. Funny thing is, like, I read this book on election day because I was a poll worker this past year.
Oh yeah.
And it was
Oh.
like a very intense experience of like sitting with my mask on. There was a lull in the crowd, so I'm gonna read this book, and it's like this intense elections happening at the same time. It was
How did you not cry?
I did, it was bad. I was like, don't look at me, I'm fine.
It's just the book.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. But like yeah, and then this is the poem about the boy.
Mhm.
And I feel like coming off the summer we had in 2020 and then to read a poem like this is just,
Yes.
and then I didn't even know that he was going to go into, um, I think
Who
that
it is, yeah.
the last poem is about Michael Brown. It might not be because there's so
I also
many.
thought it was Michael Brown when I read it.
Right.
Just the,
Okay.
yeah.
So I
Yeah, the
just wasn't
line.
even expecting. And then I think to like frame the book in that way of like this imagined place and this is a story about an imagined person. Now we're going to ground it back in reality and realize like it's really not that
Yeah.
different.
Well, and how I don't know a lot about his backstory, but he grew up in the Soviet Union, right?
Hmm.
And so is this a completely made up place, or is this like in some way somewhere where he grew up at all? Do you know?
I feel like it's based off of like real experiences that he's had, just the way he talks about it. Like he talks about growing, I think he's
Yeah.
from the Ukraine. So he
Okay.
like talks about growing up there. He makes a lot of comparisons to what's going on in the US to like other countries who've gone through destabilization in the past. So he's
Mm.
like seeing a lot of patterns and like I follow him on Twitter as well, so he'll bring stuff up
Oh, I
like
should do that.
yeah, it's really intense. And he also drops a lot of really good recommendations.
Oh,
Um,
good.
but yeah, like I feel and based off interviews I've heard from him, this place is imagined, but all of it is based off real like things that he's experienced.
Events. Wow.
Yeah.
It it makes sense. It
Yeah.
feels very real. It feels like this is the reality of living through an occupation and through destabilization and
Right.
yeah, just like the feelings of the people coming through very strongly, but in really different ways. Everyone feels differently and everyone's doing something different. And I think I read the first half of this book feeling like Alfonso was the main person and then
Hmm.
realizing later that no, the narrator is really like some other person watching all of this, it felt like.
Right. No, I agree. And I think like it's an interesting the only other book I can think of that felt like this where like each character takes over a different poem and it's like a clear story. What was the name of that book? The Surrender Tree. And it was
Oh.
about a similar situation where it's like about Cuba's independence from Spain and it takes place during that war that happened in Cuba. So I wonder if there's something about this format in particular that lends itself to that style of,
Probably.
you know?
Yeah, it's just an effective style to just draw you in and keep you moving through the plot while going over something that is a little bit hard to just palette something like this. Like if someone's just like, "Hey, this is about like occupation and war," and it's not something you want to pick up, but then you talk about it as this kind of beautiful story of these people who love each other and who love their country and love their neighbors at its
Right.
core, like it becomes a really beautiful story, even though it is really, really hard to read.
Challenging.
Yeah,
Yeah,
challenging. Yeah.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so what were some of the lines that you liked in the book?
Definitely the one in the poem that I highlighted it both times. Oh, let me scroll to it. Let me actually go to it so I read it. The body of the boy lies on the asphalt like the body of a boy.
Hmm.
That was I don't yeah, that one made me tear up immediately cuz like that is what that is.
Right.
Yeah. Um Now I'll tear up again. But it's just like just the thought of that. Like you can compare so many things to other things. Like metaphor is really strong. But when you say it like that, it's like, no, this is exactly what that is. Like you
Right.
don't get to just compare it to something else and kind of move away from it. Like you have to engage with it when it's said like that. And,
Yeah, and I feel like that's working on two different levels because I think
mm-hmm.
a lot of times in these situations, like I just heard about a boy, like a 13-year-old boy who was killed by police. They
Oh,
said he was armed. but it's like he's a 13-year-old boy. And
Yeah,
what are
he's
the
a
ways that,
child.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, what are the ways that people in these positions of power adultify children,
Hmm.
use their
Or
power
what
in
was the
these ways?
story a little while ago? Like a 7-year-old girl was handcuffed to be taken out of her school. I was like, in what situation would
Yeah,
any adult need to handcuff a 7-year-old? That's just
yeah,
like, that's horrifying.
it is. And I've seen it. Like, as a teacher, you see that kind of stuff
Oh,
happen,
geez.
and it's just like, why do you, how did we get to this point? I mean, it's something I think humans have always done. We're
Mm,
just so much more aware of it now. But, like,
yeah.
how have we still stayed on this level? And I think that's the thing of it, is like people want to adultify kids when they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And it's like they're children.
Yeah.
So, yes, but it's a child. So,
Hmm.
at some point, you've got to confront the fact that you're willing to like end the life of a child, or like
Yeah.
as a bystander, you're okay with people ending the life of a child.
Right.
It's
It was
just,
just
it's just like,
how do you as an adult justify that? Like at what point was the child a threat also? Like, yeah,
yeah,
where are you able to cross over and just not see that anymore?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's really, and that's something I appreciated about this book, is like so many instances of things like that happening where it's like this is a metaphor of what's exactly happening. I don't even know what kind of device is that, I
I
don't
don't
even know how to
know.
describe it.
Yeah, and I've never read someone else who did it quite this way, where it's just like saying exactly what the thing is felt like stronger than a metaphor could have been.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like a
Yeah.
self allegory or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what device it is. But
But I do wonder, like, it how much of that is also like his perception of the world as like an immigrant, as English being his second language, as being a deaf person, how much of that goes into play into how he
yeah.
works with language,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah. It's true.
I don't know the answer to that,
I don't
but
know. But probably quite a bit. I mean, and it could be that this is something reading more people who are from the Ukraine. Maybe that's something that is more common. I don't know.
hmm
But yeah, he certainly does it in a way that hits you right in the chest real quickly.
yeah,
Mm.
I agree.
Yeah.
Um, there's this other, I'm looking for these pairs. It's like this couplet that kind of works as a refrain.
Okay. There almost every place where I underlined something, it was like 2 lines or 3 lines there together, and
Yeah.
oftentimes those were ones that came back later.
Um, okay, it's from this poem. A city like a guillotine shivers on its way to the neck. And then the last 2 lines, at the trial of God, we will ask, why did you allow this? And the answer will be an echo, why did you allow this? That was the
Yes.
section that made me cry. That's where I was like,
Yes.
oh my God, that's like a question I've had my entire life. And to see it just like put like that on the page, I lost my shit.
Yeah. I think in my vlog I read that one because it was just like, oh my gosh, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't even know what else you could say about that. Like that line says it exactly.
hmm
Yeah. Especially what happened right before that in the book? Where is that? Is that right after Alfonso kills
The
the man?
soldier, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Alfonso just killed the soldier, and then that line is the
Yeah.
next poem. It's sort of a turning point in the book too, where the
hmm
resistance isn't an innocent thing anymore. Like there are casualties on both sides now, and it's about to really escalate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something I really appreciate about this book, is like it doesn't romanticize revolution. I
Hmm.
think we have a big issue with doing that in the US because of our history, but
Yeah.
like this book makes it really clear it's ugly on both sides. You're going to get your hands dirty. are you prepared for that? Do
Yeah.
you understand what that actually means?
Yeah, when in our history we clean it up so much, so it's all
Mm-hmm.
very patriotic, but you don't talk about how like every single one of the soldiers who was on the other side, they lived here, their families lived here, like they'd lived here
Right.
probably their whole lives. Like it wasn't just people from another country invading or anything, but we talk about it in those terms to make it seem like revolution is this exciting, amazing thing, but it's not.
Right.
Yeah. Or even when I studied in England, they talked about the French Revolution quite a bit because that had a huge impact on everything that was happening over there, especially writing wise. But that the French Revolution was really a reflection of the American Revolution, but when it went in a totally different way. That they're over here, they're just decapitating everyone they can get their hands on, and it was very bloody and horrible. And yet we have this romanticized version of, oh, the American Revolution
Yeah.
worked and it was clean, and we threw some tea overboard and won a
Yeah.
war, but uh, it isn't really. And then of course other revolutions, it's a bloody dark thing, like a bunch of people lost their lives who
Mm-hmm.
maybe didn't have an impact on what was going on. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's
It's
yeah,
really intense.
yeah.
I, it's as I was rereading this, I was thinking about, don't judge me, but I was thinking about Rupi Kaur and like the difference of writing style. And I feel
Yeah,
like this book is like an example of what you can accomplish when you're willing to trust your readers. You know,
that's a good point.
I feel like because I'm reading The Sun and Her Flowers for Poetry-a-thon right now, and like
Mm-hmm.
so many times she'll build up with like a fairly decent poem and then just takes the wind out of the sails because the title will be the thing that she's trying to talk about.
Yeah.
I don't know.
What I felt like the Sun and Flowers didn't work the same way Milk and Honey worked, and I do need to reread Milk and Honey to see.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is a lot of like taking the wind out of your sails. Like she's just handing things to you. And I think that worked for her with Instagram, and she did it well in Milk and Honey, and I felt like there was a build throughout the entirety of the
Right.
book. But yeah, I do think she's really willing to like spoon feed it to you, whereas Ilya Kaminsky's not. He's gonna tell you
Yeah.
what you're gonna take with you, and yeah, trust you to take it and understand it.
I just think like I just think it's so different. Like even so like one of the poems is titled The Townspeople Circle the Boy's Body. So it's like a scene description almost, you know? It's like boom, this
Yeah,
is this is what we're doing.
like
But then
stage
you
direction.
yeah,
Yeah,
and then you read it and you're just like this is so much more. Um and then to end it the way that it does, it just feels like I don't know, even though this poem in particular is like mostly just describing, it's taking you on a journey,
mm-hmm.
but it's not like stopping to make sure you're with it. It's just like, this is where we're going. You need to catch up. You need to keep up with us.
Yeah, well,
I,
and often in Rupi Kaur's work, her picture will be like, the description of what she's just described. In this one, the last line is the people are deaf, but it's also the first instance of the town watches.
mm-hmm.
And in that poem especially, that is part of that poem completely. Like you couldn't take that out and have the poem sit exactly the same way, because now you're setting up with the town watches as part of that whole
Right.
experience of the poem.
So then it becomes this meta thing where it's like you as the reader are the audience member. The town is also the audience. And like everybody is now partaking in what's happening.
Yeah.
It's like just so many layers to it. It's mind blowing.
Yeah. It's incredible. It's really good. Well, there's so many good lines. There was one. Let me find it. Oh, and the soldiers aim for us. He also just has like these great descriptions. In this one, on Earth, a man cannot flip a finger at the sky because each man is already a finger flipped at the sky.
Oh my God, that's
Oh,
so
that was
good.
amazing.
Yes.
He's just like, he's not gonna pull punches on you. It's good.
No. And it's so like ugh, so many things come to mind when I hear something like that. And
Yeah.
that's what I love about it. It's open-ended enough that you can make any connection you want, but there's also a very clear message being sent. Either it's pointing or it's a fuck you, but it's something like that, you know? I,
Yeah.
I love it.
It's really good. Yeah, the whole thing is incredible.
Yeah.
I loved it. What are some other good ones? There's just so many places that's like finding some of the best ones is just the whole book. Oh, okay. What did you think about the ones, because it happens a few times where it's the poem is titled Question, and it's what is this one, what is a man, a quiet between two bombardments.
Mm-hmm.
Those stuck out to me really strongly too. Like
Yeah,
in each section that felt like the turning point
I
for
agree.
each
And like
person.
the way it changes depending on what part of the book it is. Because like towards the end, it's like, what is a woman? A quiet between two bombardments.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just I think it is like you said. It's like a turning point. It's like right before the resolution of the act or like the very
Mm-hmm.
ending of the act. It's like think about this. Now we're gonna go into it. I wonder too if it's like a framing of this is what the ending is gonna focus on.
Oh yeah, I think you're right.
Like this concept of focusing on a man or just focusing on the woman.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because Act Two, when that question comes up, it's called The Townspeople Tell the Story of Mama Galia.
Yes, that was my favorite section.
Yeah.
I liked it a lot, and I think it was because I was less frantically worried about her than I was for Alfonso and Sonia. I was just like, oh my gosh, these people, I'm so worried. But for her, it felt like she was fighting the whole time. I was like, yeah, girl, fight the good fight. You got this. And of course, it
Yeah.
doesn't go well, but I loved the section.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
every
Sorry.
single. I know, I was just reading a part.
Flipping through it, and I underlined door from the poem The Trial, doors and puppets dangle from their handles, a puppet for every shot citizen. Fuck.
Oh, geez,
So
yeah.
just and yeah, I just feel like the whole book really does layer on what this place looks like, which is what makes it so effective. And then
Mm-hmm.
by the end of it, you're just like, this place looks fucking insane with all these puppets and dead bodies everywhere and soldiers running amok. And it's like,
Right? Yeah, because it brings back, like, the bodies aren't cleaned up. It brings them back again and again.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah, it's incredible.
And then I feel like the last poem, I guess it's kind of like an epilogue. Um,
That poem is set up to wreck you, I think. I
yeah,
just sat and cried for a little bit after I got through that poem.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's this is the poem I've underlined the most.
Mm-hmm.
And just like that repetition of it's a peaceful country, we're in a time of peace, it's a peaceful country. And then it's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, and even though both of us thought of Michael Brown in the body of a boy, lies on the pavement exactly like the body of a boy, there are a lot of people who it could bring to mind. And like depending upon where you are in the world, like you could have someone else specific in mind, and maybe he had someone else specific in mind when he wrote this. And
Hmm.
yeah, last year, I mean, George Floyd might have been the first person to come to mind when you
Yeah,
read it. So
that's a
yeah,
really good point.
yeah, and I think he leaves it open for that. That you can think of all these people, and that's the point. Like it's not one person he's talking about. This is going to happen again and again and again. And like this is a time of peace. He's not saying it's a specific time because it's constantly happening. I mean, it just happened.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love this book, and it's so hard to talk about.
So hard. Yeah. Yeah, like on a line level, you could go through and like everything is so beautiful, all these gorgeous lines, But at the same time, like, this is a book that's really saying something, and the experience of reading it beginning to end is the most impactful part. Like, you couldn't pick out one poem, and like picking out one poem and showing it to someone would have a really strong impact because they're amazing poems, but it is the experience of the book that works so well.
Yeah, I agree. And I would be curious, like, I've never really felt this way about a book of poetry, but this is one that I wouldn't mind seeing adapted in some way. And then, it would have to be more experimental, because I feel like if it was just a straight up play or like movie, it wouldn't work. But if it could be avant-garde in some way, like, I'd be really curious to see that. And I've never wanted that in a book of poetry before.
Yeah. But it would be interesting to see someone really take it and turn it into like a ballet or something.
Yeah.
Really emotional connection. It'd be really good. Maybe. It could be terrible.
Could be terrible.
Could do a good job though.
Yeah. I think a ballet is interesting too, because I wonder, like, how do you translate this idea of deafness in a play? I don't know. I know, like, Spring Awakening did that one show, or like that one, I don't know what it's called in theater, but that like one season where it was a deaf theater. So they signed all the songs, but they still sang everything and danced. They were just signing the whole time as well.
But it would be even better in a silent performance for a book like this, and trying to get across the same thing.
Yeah.
I would love to see that. Someone needs to do that.
If any playwrights end up watching this.
Yes. Anyone who's writing a play or a ballet, this one. Please.
Check it out.
Yeah.
Try it.
It'd be so good.
I know. But
yeah, thank you so much for recommending that we do this.
Of course.
I started hearing about, like, people are talking about this for a reason, and like
Right.
I've heard about it, but I'm really glad we did this as a buddy read, because
I agree. I'm glad we got to talk about it, because it's so, I think it's also really different from the other books we've talked about so far. So
they've been a little more on the fun side.
Yeah,
they've had things to discuss, but this is very much like a strongly political type of situation, and just so beautifully done.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, okay. Do you have anything else to add, or?
No, I just think everyone should read it.
Yes.
And if you don't get it, it's okay. But, like, read it again.
Yeah. It could definitely stand a few rereads.
Yes.
Yeah, and take your time with it. Because I sat down being like, it's a book of poetry, I'm efficient one day. It took me maybe like 5 days to get all the way through, because you have to stop and recover mentally somewhat, because it is really hard, and it sits with you and you think about it for a long time. And I think the only other book I've read recently that made me do the same thing was Tea House of the Almighty by Patricia Smith. Her writing is stunning. She has some poems. It's not the similar format. Her poems are just standalone poems, but some of them were emotional in the same way that this was emotional.
Interesting.
Where it really drags you into the poem, and you're inside of a character, and it's devastating in some places. So, yeah, you got to put that down and recover and come back to it later.
I agree. I think the only reason I was able to get through it in one day was because all I was doing was sitting down. And, like, there was a good 4-hour chunk where nobody was coming by the precinct. So I was like, all right, let's just do this. Because I didn't bring any other books today.
Oh, no. Yeah. That would certainly do it.
Yeah.
All right.
But, yeah.
Well, I hope everyone shows up next week on your channel, which I'll make sure I'll link it down below to go watch the live show for the poetry panel.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm excited. Yeah.
It's going to be awesome.
Yeah. That's all from us today then, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye.